Thank you all for joining us for the final high-level panel of this year's public forum. Last but not least, because it brings digital into the equation. And I think no one on this planet thinks that any climate solution is possible without tapping into the unlimited potential digital tools have to offer. Another diverse top-level panel will have a go at this. But before that, we are honored to have a short video message from the leader of a very important player in the world of trade and climate finance, President Asakawa from the Asian Development Bank. After the video, Tian will take over with the panel. Video time again.
Dear colleagues, I am pleased to contribute to today's discussion on the critical role of trade for green and inclusive growth and development in Asia and the Pacific. Trade must become an integral part of climate solutions. As trade-related activities contribute to roughly a quarter of global carbon emissions, trade finance can make an outsized impact on emission reduction. Green and sustainable trade financing is critical for businesses to implement sustainable practices across their supply chains. This will improve the sustainability performance of firms by building sustainability into value chains, shifting production to carbon-efficient locations, spreading low-carbon technologies globally. Countries from Asia and the Pacific should play a positive role and actively support sustainable and inclusive trade and supply chains through reducing trade barriers on environmental goods and services, decarbonizing supply chains, and expanding access to green trade financing, particularly for SME suppliers. The trade finance gap remains large. Our influential trade finance gap survey released about 10 days ago shows the gap has further widened to $2.5 trillion in 2022. At ADB, we are committed to scaling up trade financing for greener, more inclusive, resilient, transparent, and socially responsible trade and supply chains. We continue to expand and innovate our trade finance solutions. Since 2009, ADB's Trade and Supply Chain Finance Program has supported $67 billion in trade through guarantees, loans, and knowledge support. Nearly 60% of these transactions targeted small and medium-sized enterprises. This program encourages women's participation in trade and supports disability initiatives. Finally, the program also promotes green trade through carbon tracking and reporting across supply chains, and works to implement environmental and social management systems in partner banks. I look forward to a lively discussion on how to harness international trade for sustainable and inclusive development in Asia and the Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the speaker for providing some already inspiration before our conversation starts. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Geneva. What a pleasure to see all of you here, not only on the stage, but also in the audience from our media friends as well. My name is Tian Wei. I'm a moderator for this session. It is entitled Digital Boost to Green Innovation. Some say, wow, you got all of these critical words inside the same panel: digitalization, green, innovation, and boost. Luckily, we have a lot of input already from earlier Bernard's introduction, and also extremely important, the Madam DG is sitting here with us, providing her personal and the organization support. So thank you, both of you, for that. Meanwhile, I'm so glad to be able to moderate this panel and introduce very briefly within a few seconds about the topic. Digitalization, as we know, has been transforming our world, even though there are challenging issues related to it, but we are seeing it is making a difference to our lives and the many around the world. Meanwhile, green innovation is so important as we are approaching the tasks of SDGs. We all know how challenging it is today. So how can we bring the synergy between the two, digitalization and green innovation? Now, I, as a media person, would not be able to answer that question expertly, but we have a wonderful panel. They're coming from different continents, different walks of lives, and also different perspectives. My great honor to introduce, I'll follow the order that of sitting here. On my immediate left, Robin Salwux, who is the CEO and founder of eAgronome. Good to see you, Robin.
Glad to be here.
Next, we have this wonderful lady, Nelly Cheboy, CEO and founder of TechLead Africa. Good to see you, Nelly.
Thank you.
Also, we are joined by Thomas Lamanauskas, who is the Deputy Secretary General of International Telecommunication Union. Good to see you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Wei.
Thank you. Next, we have Sally Radwan, who is the Chief Digital Officer of United Nations Environment Program. Good to see you. Last, but certainly not least, we are also joined from the academic circle, Professor, I hope I pronounced your name right. I just learned it. Yes, thank you for your confidence. Samnat Badia Roy, who is a head of the Center for Atmospheric Sciences with the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. Good to see you, Professor. So we have a strong panel. Let's go directly into this conversation. After our interaction on the stage, I know there are much smarter ideas and questions coming from our audience and our media colleagues as well. So we're also going to open the floor later. Now, digitalization. Let's explain the topic a little bit. Which stage is it happening from your parts of the world? From your industry, what are some of the major trends that you're watching very closely that could contribute to our discussion today? Let's go from you.
Yeah, look, well, my industry and my North Star is reaching net zero food production and and kind of regeneration of soils. So all of my answers will be somehow connected with this. And well, I see that on the digitalization side, and if you connect it with sustainability, there are three main aspects that are happening right now. One is monitoring the impact to the nature. So this is where the digitalization has a very big role to play, to see what is the impact of different, well, in my case, farming practices and etc. Second is bringing new knowledge to people to implement sustainable practices. So that's where digitalization can spread way more than we can do in one-to-one human interactions. And then the third thing is bringing finances or financial incentives to those who actually want to apply new practices and making this automatic and digital. So I think right now especially on the sustainability field, we are mainly on the piloting phase of those aspects, but eventually we want to move more towards scaling. Just to give you an example, we are working today with 1.4 million hectares of farmers, but there is billions.
They're in Africa?
They're in Europe and Africa, yeah, but there are billions all around the world who are waiting for these solutions. So I think we are doing very well with the innovation part, but we have to do way more on the implementation part.
Good answer, I guess. It also gives us a very good beginning, because today we are not just going to talk about the challenges. We are going to talk about the solutions. We are going to talk about the actions. That's what we are here for. Nell? What about from the African continent?
So I'm coming from the education landscape, and I grew up in poverty myself, and I went to school barefoot, but I feel it has gotten a lot harder right now to be a child in rural Kenya. At least when I was growing up, the rivers were not dry. Right now the rivers are dry, we can't even harvest. The last time we had a good harvest was 2019, and so it's getting really worse. And all the people are trying to do, they're like, let's plant more trees. They just wanna do all they can about climate change. They're just planting trees. And so it has become extremely hard to be a kid in rural Kenya. And so when I think about the digital economy, I think about being able to work remotely for any company in the world without leaving your village. That's what we're coming at. And I think it's really cheap. It's really cheap to do that. All you need to do is educate our kids, educate our population, how they can work as software engineers, how they can work as producers, how they can do that from the communities, because you don't have to leave home to make it.
Well said. From our own village for the global community. Let's go to Thomas. What about digitalization? Which stage is it? This is your expertise.
Well, thank you very much, Ray, and indeed to the global community, and I think I'm following up on that, because as you say, from our corners of the world, so my corner of the world is the world, as the UN Agency of Digital Technologies. I think it's great to follow on Robin and Nelly, because they already showed how digital can be important in different areas, from agriculture to education. But of course, to achieve that, we have to have infrastructure in place. And I think we still, so we just released new numbers of connectivity, which shows that currently we have 5.4 billion people connected to the internet, but still 2.6 billion people offline. And behind those numbers is a few also trends. First is that this double-digit growth on connectivity that we enjoyed every year during the COVID, really COVID boost we call it sometimes, is now a bit of a tapering off, so it's still growing, but not at that fast pace. And of course, another thing that's behind that is the disparities in the connectivity. So if we have in the high-income countries more than 90% of people connected, in the low-income countries less than a third is, And I think that's where picking up what Nelly said, about these opportunities, that's where exactly those opportunities are. That's where also that divide is, and that's how. And it's important to overcome that divide to get that boost. And we see that divide with the really sometimes negative consequences. UNESCO recently released a report about education in the context of COVID-19 and remote education, and demonstrated how actually COVID, decreased those inequalities in education as well, by 500 million students being excluded from education as the world moved to online education. And of course, then, so this is like a basics what we have, but of course we're now starting to talk about this what we call still emerging technologies, even though in many ways they emerged, like AI. And there we also see, of course, big disparities as well. We see the good potential to tackle challenges from development, for economic development to climate, but we see disparities. So statistics say, for example, that in terms of economic boost, to China's economy, AI could add around 26% of GDP by 2030, to North America nearly 15%, but those numbers are much, much very different in other parts of the world. So I think I think we have digitalization growing and becoming more pervasive, but we have huge disparities that we need to overcome.
Right. You talk a lot about the challenges, which I hope you are going to provide some of the solutions a bit later.
We'll try.
Okay. And by the way, I also have some numbers to share with our audience. So this is from this house, from WTO. Data from WTO. Global digital service trade reached already about 3.82 trillion US dollars in the year 2022. That is marking a 3.9% year-on-year increase in this quite challenging economic situation we are talking about. And that's accounting for about 53 to 54% of global service trade overall. So digitalization is really catching up when we talk about trade, just to add to some of your numbers earlier. Let me go to you also, Sally, about your thoughts from the UNEP's perspective. Where is digitalization of the things that you are dealing with today?
Well, one of the things that I love about the world we live in today, Wei, is that it forces us to think beyond borders, not just geographical borders, but also across sectors and across industries and across domains. So in this day and age, you can no longer talk about trade, for example, without talking about digitalization, without talking about the environmental impact of things, without talking about the economic agenda and education and literacy and so on. And what this forces us to think about as well are the enablers. And Thomas talked about connectivity, so I'm going to talk about data. So imagine a scenario where, we don't have to imagine it, it happened a few weeks ago when we had those terrible floods in India. And India is one of the biggest suppliers of rice in the world. So initially it's an environmental crisis, but it also has impacts on the global supply chain of rice. So many countries had to review how they're going to meet their needs to feed their local populations because of the floods that happened in India. Now imagine if we had the right data at the right time that would allow us to forecast these types of disasters via digital channels, being able to communicate them and put in place mitigation measures to at least lessen the effect on the global supply chain of rice. So these are the kinds of stories that data tells us, and from an environmental perspective, just to bring it back to my domain, that's also what we try to do. So we have, across the United Nations, we have 92 SDG indicators, and we're already able to track up to 42% of them using data. Of course, that leaves another 58%, and we're working on that. But it's important that we look at these data sets holistically. How does environment cross-intersect with digital? What is the digital impact, and what is the environmental impact? We always have to look at both sides of the coin. And so
what does both sides of the coin tell you right now?
Well, it tells us that we're doing pretty well on the digital for sustainability side, although there's still a lot to do. Not doing that great on the sustainable digitalization aspect of it. So that's what we need to pay more attention to.
Thank you. Professor, looking at the panel, besides me, you are the only one coming from Asia, and as a moderator, I would not be able to comment. So your voice is so crucial from a huge proportion of the world population as well. Where is Asia in terms of digitalization, knowing that you are an expert in atmospheric science? Please, Professor.
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to give you an example.
Microphone open. Voila.
Okay.
Works.
I was told, but I guess I didn't pay attention. So I'll give you an example, like, Tianwei, when you at the beginning, you talked about, like, this topic has, or this session has all these buzzwords. So I was thinking of, like, the one thing that I work on is renewable energy, which kind of hits a lot of these green, digital, and trade, these buzzwords, and it's a great kind of success story, especially in India. I mean, whenever you are talking about renewable energy, you are addressing a very critical concern, that is electricity, which is responsible for about a third. When you look at direct and indirect emissions, so about a third of carbon emissions. And so renewable energy is a solution, like a major part of the solution to this problem. And in India, what I have personally seen in the last 7, 8 years, that we have grown from almost a very small player in renewables to today we are in the top 5 in whichever metric that you use, in mostly in wind and solar. And this would not have been possible, not just installed capacity, but also like grid penetration of renewables, if there was no widespread digitalization. Now, when you run, relying on wind and solar, basically we all know that these are intermittent. The wind blows hot and cold. The sun is shining, a cloud comes in, the sun is gone. So obviously, to handle this intermittency, basically if you are a grid operator, you have to somehow manage the supply with the demand. And so this is something that we get. My student has a startup, and there are a number of other startups that are working in this field, is like getting all this data, starting from consumption at an individual consumer's meter, and to the generation from an individual inverter in a solar plant. You put them together, you get real-time information about what is the load, what is the demand. You take all this data and then feed it into your forecast models, AI-based models often, to forecast what is going to happen. So if you are a grid operator and you did not have access to this data and you did not know how to use this data, we are looking at perhaps large-scale power cuts when the wind dies down, or we are looking at grid instabilization when there is a power surge. So without digitalization, I think this success story that we have would not have happened. And we are going kind of full steam ahead, by 2027, I think almost more than half, almost 75% of our power perhaps will come from renewables. Now, there is one other thing that I need to bring in here, interesting twist.
Briefly, please.
If you, I told Tianwei that sometimes when I talk, I just keep on going. But I think I need to say this because this is how I want to make the connection with trade. So now, if you want to manage these ups and downs, you have to have a big grid, right? If you look at the earth, it's day at one place, night at the other place. So if we have a big enough grid, which is something we did in India, that now it is, instead of regional grids, it's a national grid. If you look at what causes these disruptions in renewables, these are large weather systems. For example, in Europe, you'll have a frontal system that comes through UK, goes out through Russia. Like in India also, we have what we call Western disturbances coming from Central Asia, going across Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bhutan, all of these. Unfortunately, our grids are often regional, and they are it's very difficult for you to send power across the grids. So that is where I think a big challenge. I think if you are looking at renewable becoming a major solution, I think that is a barrier. We need to figure out a way to manage how to transfer power from one grid to the other. And that I see as kind of perhaps a trade barrier. So that needs to be solved.
There are a lot of questions like this that need to be worked out, both as infrastructure level and also at the action level. Having said that, though, you mainly focus on your home country, India, and rightly so. If I could also provide some data about Asia as a whole, the latest that we got is that Asia accounts for 60% of the overall global digital-related patents and new technologies over the past few years. So that's a very promising continent we are talking about. I don't want to only talk about Asia, because Africa, as a very important part of the developing economies, plays a critical role, especially with the Africa free trade area, the continental free trade area. We see a lot of young people like Nelly go banking, for example, with the digital means. So all of this is really changing. Besides the earlier stereotypes we have about the developing economies and even the least developed economies, we are seeing changing right now. You probably also could tell similar stories from your parts of the world.
Well, absolutely. Well, I mean, we are very connected to both Europe and Africa, and Europe and Africa are connected to each other as well. The kind of on the digitalization, the main difference that we see, and probably that's some people who have visited Africa see as well, is that in Europe we have been more on the computer. In Africa, it's already in the smartphone. So it's a bit like always in those developing countries, you skip steps, you go ahead right away, but in the end, you know, it's all the same. In our case, if you want to kind of move global economy more towards sustainability, then digitalization has to be part of this, because you cannot go physically, in our case, to all of the farmers and ask what are your emissions. You need digital tools for this. You cannot go like physically all the power plants. You cannot see what are the emissions over there. You need the digitalization for this. And well, in that sense, Europe and Africa are quite similar. The difference that we see, for example, is that well, on the aspect where the money is coming from in transforming toward digitalization and toward the greener economy. In Europe, it's mainly coming from the value chain. So if we are incentivizing farmers to apply more sustainable practices, it is usually paid by the value chain players, so by food companies. In Africa, I think the key theme is voluntary carbon market. And this is something that is bringing more income to African economy, and is directing this and paying basically for the digitalization and at the same time for the greener economy. So these are the differences we are noticing.
Thomas, I guess it's time for you to speak again.
Of course. No, so thanks a lot. And I think there's different aspects here. You know, of course, again, disparity question, you know, we're still Africa now around 40% of the people online on average also. But then how you use the technology, and I think picking up on some aspects. And I think the similar how people can leapfrog as people, you know, with their smartphones versus fixed connectivity, there is a ways how you can leapfrog in other uses of technology. So for example, we have this now launched with a number of partners, what we call Green Digital Action Track. And actually UNEP is also our partner there, and very proudly. And we are looking as part of that process of how to use digital to boost some climate solutions. And of course, we have like a big climate solutions from climate monitoring through satellites, and also then increasing efficiency of other industries and increasing early warning systems. But what really struck me, like we just had this discussion yesterday with how sometimes you also can leapfrog with the different solutions because you have to. So for example, rainfall measurement, and I'll just give you the specific example. So, you know, you can have a dedicated census for that, you know, and do that in what would we call professionalized way. But you can do that through the mobile signal attenuation measurements. That means like a, you know, sorry for those technical terms, but then when our mobile phones, when they connect to a tower, there's a signal between there. And that signal transmits the information, but at the same time, if you measure differences in that signal, you can actually now, and that was so interesting to see from WMO studies, you can actually measure rainfall and rainfall patterns and how the weather will be moving, you know. And that's kind of the way how you leapfrog. So you don't install the dedicated sensors for that, but you already use existing infrastructure, and mobile infrastructure is pervasive, and even in you know, everywhere in the developing world, in Africa, everywhere. So, which actually allows you to overcome those challenges that we need to overcome. So maybe I'll just using that, I'll just pick up on something that Sally said as well about, so that's example is how we progress digital for sustainability. And we still need to do a lot of that, but we do some progress. But also, and I think, thank you Sally for that hook about whether digital is sustainable. I think that's also now another aspect, I think. And that's where we starting the discussion that's sometimes not a very pleasant discussion to start, you know, because we started a discussion about digital and say, look, it is a solution. But as we have a solution, it also causes a problem. For example, e-waste problem. And we now have nearly 53.6 last measurement, 53.6 megatons of e-waste generated every year, actually on the track to double by 2050, not to, and then the problem is also then the global flows of that is also not very encouraging, so in terms of as a disguise of a second-hand use or cheaper device use, you can be actually exporting e-waste to the countries with associated problems. There are the opportunities there, of course, in terms of, for example, precious metals that can be extracted from e-waste, but that needs to be managed well as a carbon emission from digital as well, which we also, and I'm happy to talk later on about that, but we also need to both measure and make sure that we step up to our responsibilities to reduce as well. So while digital is a solution, but I think is also we need to really, as with everything, look at the risks as well of that.
We are looking at the risks from the very beginning of this discussion, I guess, already. But the question is, how are we going to deal with these risks? These are the key that we are working on. Nelly, please, and also Sally, provide your perspective in that, or the, mainly how you are localizing, for example, in Africa, these challenges and try to provide solutions while you are going along the way. Yeah.
Just really quickly, I'll comment on the e-waste. So for us, you find that, so we get most of our computers from companies all over the world. So most of these computers, to them, they're old, at 3 years old. And we have a custom operating system like bare bones Linux that we have taken out all the heavy stuff, which means that they can run on machines that are almost like 15 years. So we're taking machines that are 3 years old and get another 12 years of work on them, educating a lot of kids. What has happened recently is that most companies have become really wary of donating their machines. So you'll find companies have like computers that are 3 years old and they just take it somewhere and they crashed all of it. So you can imagine just the disparity there, like how impactful those machines will have been. And it just has something to do with data regulation, all of that. So I think as we talk about digitalization, it's always constantly the divide that we are seeing, the people producing it and the people who could benefit a lot from it. So your question about some of the local solutions. So there's a company that is very close to where we are in Mogotio that is actually, they hired a lot of local youth in the community to actually do AI work. So they were working remotely for self-driving cars and help train those AI models. And that created a tons of jobs, a lot. And we're seeing so many opportunities for youth in the community to actually work remotely for these companies. And it's creating a lot of jobs, and it's very, very optimistic that way.
It's so important to hear your voice, I think. It's not only hearing how different perspectives coming into this discussion, but also how smartly people, for example, from your parts of the world are trying to deal with these problems. Hands-on. I'm very inspired, by the way. Thank you for that. And Sally, please, I know you have some input here as well.
Well, let me actually follow up on what Nelly said and take it to maybe a wider global level, because that's exactly the kind of thing that is needed. Is to digitalization for the sake of digitalization is good and does help. And we talked about the enablers earlier, and I'll talk again about data later. But it's what you do with it that matters. It's the so what that comes after that. And for example, we do a lot of data collection and measurement and visualization at UNEP for environmental data. But what we're also being asked increasingly is by our member states is, tell me what to do. I know there's a problem. I know there are issues. How do I solve them? And those specific questions and how to solve them, they have to come from the local communities. So at UNEP, for example, we're building something called the World Environment Situation Room, which sounds like a very big name, but really we see our role as the enabler. We provide the data exchange layer, but then we go to the people like Nelly, we go to the people in charge who are aware of the issues on the ground and can tell us what are the use cases that we need to build on top of that, or what they have built and how we can integrate it into this platform and make them available to the whole world.
What have you learned so far? What have you learned so far? You say you're going to those people. What have you learned?
What we've learned is that actually, so two things, one on the application side and one on on the data side. On the application side, there are a lot of commonalities of problems in local communities in far reaches of the world, but they don't have a way of communicating or exchanging that information or that expertise. And they often don't have a means of accessing funding. So what we need is kind of like a matchmaking layer that enables that kind of exchange. And this can, of course, be a digital platform, but it's all about connecting humans at the end of the day. What we also need is a data layer or a data exchange framework. Since we're talking about trade, a data trade mechanism that allows us to exchange data from different domains and overlay them on top of each other to reach those insights that we need to create solutions.
Robin?
Yeah, well, we are talking about solutions over here. So one of the, as I started beginning as well, then digitalization and sustainability, they go hand in hand. In Africa, we are helping African farmers to create carbon credits, and we are bringing carbon income to them. So that means digitalization and sustainability at the same time, because all of those farmers, to get this carbon income, one of the requirements is that they would have to use our software to manage their farm and to see what crops they're growing and track all the tasks. We also detect some of the crops with satellites and so on. Now, the challenge and solution together with this, one of the challenges is that lately, voluntary carbon market has faced a lot of criticism. Mainly because there is no, if I tell I'm doing carbon credits, no lawyer can say what I am exactly doing, because there is no legal framework around this. Now, companies in Europe and in North America, they have really ambitious climate targets. They want to reach carbon neutrality. It is impossible for them to reach to zero emissions. So they have to offset part of this. So they want to pay to someone else to change practices, do something else to store more carbon. For example, storing more carbon in the soil. And they would love to pay, for example, to African farmers to restore their soils. But the problem is that they are afraid. They're afraid that what they do is wrong because there is no legal framework. So that's one of the clear kind of things that we see, developments that we are waiting for, to have a very clear understanding on what is on the voluntary carbon market, what is considered as carbon credit? How should you count those? How should you measure those? What are the permanence requirements? What are the additionality requirements, and so on? And it's mainly focused on reaching to net zero emissions, but as I said before, it's impossible without the digitalization, because you have to quantify this, and to quantify hundreds of thousands or eventually millions of farmers and their work, you have to have digital solutions.
So you are telling us a perfect example of, well, we are seeking solutions, new challenges coming up, right? So I guess we're going to deal with some of these challenges a bit later, talking about framework, structures, and how that would work. Professor, also from your part, how do you see what we just discussed?
I think, broadly speaking, I think a lot of the scientific and engineering challenges, the tools are there. For example, I'll draw on a couple of things that Sally said, very interesting. So, perhaps if I go back a decade or two, there was no climate data available. Today, I can safely say that any kind of climate projections, future climate projections or data, it's available for free for anyone in this room. But the point is that when we are talking about data access, I think the definition needs to be a little bit different, because it's one thing signing up on the IPCC website, right here, everything is happening right here in Geneva. So IPCC website and downloading all this data. But how do you unpack this? Especially if you're a individual user or a medium, small industry business, how do you unpack this? You don't have a team of climate scientists or computer data scientists to be able to make sense of it. Now, obviously, if you have a local climate environment data, what does that mean for you? What is the risk? And I think that is where the challenge is, that we have the data, but we don't know what it means for us. And only when we do it, then we will be able to unlock the full potential of actually getting into adaptation, mitigation, or figuring out how we can monetize that information. So I think, like, I'm glad that what Sally said, that UN is trying to do this. I know that WCRP also has a program called My Climate Risk, and the whole idea is to build. It's a difficult challenge. It is not a science and engineering challenge, but like, what does it mean for us? So I think perhaps WMO, WTO, like, right across the street, if these minds could come together, then we will be able to come up with meaningful information. Because I just, like the example that Sally gave, and I was thinking that of the floods in India and how that causes, like, perhaps food insecurity in other parts of the world. So, like, there is, like, Google has a flood forecasting app, right, which gives you forecast floods. Then there are organizations, at least one that I know of, which does a food insecurity forecasting. So we have all of these things happening in bits and pieces. It needs to be put together to generate, like, meaningful information, not just like downloading some abstract climate data, but actually meaningful information. So that's why I think, like, this kind of the last mile needs to be bridged.
It is important last mile we are talking about.
Absolutely, yeah.
What we're saying over the past half an hour almost is something very important, that we are not only knowing the challenges, we're trying to seek the solutions. But while we are seeking the solutions, new challenges coming up. For example, how to see data flow, how much data flow is doing, where is it flowing to, and how we have access to data flow. Meanwhile, what about literacy of the people? How would they use these data? Who would help them? Who would support them? What kind of mechanism is being established in order to support them? And at the same time, how do we also bring the, reduce the gap of whether data or digitalization, particularly related to green innovation? So all of these are clearly already outlined. I see all of you are radical listeners to one another. So is our audience. But having said that, though, let's talk about the solutions, because we promised our audience earlier about the solutions. Recently, we have seen among whether it is bilateral, multilateral, or regional trade mechanisms, they are trying to deal with data flows. They're trying to deal with rules of data flows and trying to set some examples. WTO has also been working a lot of research on that. So how do you see what are some of the most promising areas we're looking at, and that could provide some impetus for our future, to shine on the future solutions? Thomas.
So thanks a lot. Of course.
So you promise now is not just about the challenges. You are here to give solutions. Half an hour already, so you give solutions.
I can spend an hour on solutions as well.
Okay,
so
okay.
Just by myself. But I think it's like, and I was thinking about your questions, there's like two sides to that. Solutions for not having enough and solutions for having too much, So it's like, and I'll explain what I mean by that, So because we kind of see these two sides of digital as well, of digital inequality and ability not to be, the problems of when people are not connected, when this digital world is not at their hands. And then another aspect which we spoke as well about, as we progress with the digital, which are the risks this is creating, in terms of climate risks, as we discussed, from e-waste to emissions, but also, of course, and you started to talk here about data governance. Now we increasingly talk about risks of artificial intelligence and others. And I think we kind of need solutions for both, So because I think sometimes we focus on one or the other. We say, how do we bring digital to everyone? Or then we kind of get totally scared and say, no, actually, it's also risky. We kind of need to reclaim cyberspace for humanity. We need to manage this development. So I think for us, exactly from ITU's perspective, we look at both sides. So of course, infrastructure development, we do that through so many layers, from of course global regulatory layer, and we are the agency that manages spectrum globally as well as satellite orbits. And just later this year, we'll have what we call World Radio Conference, where the world comes together to agree how that is managed. And the idea of that, of course, in terms of access to data, wireless plays a huge role. We just discussed how smartphones change their use everywhere in the world. To, of course, different gamut of standards to our development work. And our development work will also focus from helping national frameworks in terms of regulatory frameworks that enable private sector investment flow, because only government fund money would not help, to then going down and making sure that the, let's say, demand side is there. So I'm very proud of of our initiatives, which we call Smart Islands and Smart Village Initiative, which actually then you go down to the community level and you take the whole government approach and you kind of see how that community is, can use and what is the potential from all the perspective to use the digital, and that becomes a driver to deploy there. And
Give me an example.
So basically, we take communities like in Vanuatu, like the first place we started that is South Malakula in Vanuatu, in the middle of the Pacific. Where you go to the village there, and you start identifying together with the government agencies and in a UN approach we call different services that community would use. So you're not talking about getting that community connected. You're talking about e-agriculture, access to financial information, access to markets, and then and then access to health. And then from that you kind of start, and then from that you kind of say, what do you need? What kind of connectivity you need to enable that?
Thank you. Robin, Nelly, it's time for you to judge whether those solutions really work. Just kidding. Please, your input here, Robin.
Yeah, well, I think we have everything we need. I mean, for digitalization, for reaching, well, maybe not for net zero emissions, but close to this, we have everything. So now the focus is on the implementation. And on implementation, well, Nelly is implementing digital solutions already. We have partners all around Europe and Africa. In Africa, we have a guy called Mr. Samuel. And he's working with small farmers. He has his own training center for them, bringing farmers over there, training for a week. And then those farmers go to their own villages, apply new practices, start using software to, I don't know, to kind of order some seed or fertilizers or whatever they need. So we have those implementers. Now it's only about supporting those local people. I think we are going to the right direction anyways. There are many challenges. There are new challenges even we don't know about, but we will figure it out. We are going to the right direction, and it's mainly about supporting the implementation of the existing technologies. If you would implement, well, solar energy, like energy from the sun or wind, this is the cheapest already today. Implementing this on farming, there are already so many solutions that can improve the productivity in the farming, digital solutions, implementing those. And I guess Nelly can give really good examples how she is working together with young people in Kenya to educate them how to implement, how to be those kind of activators in their villages and make sure that the digitalization is happening over there.
Right.
So when I was thinking about starting Tech-led Africa, there's a question that kept coming up in my head, which was, why is rural Africa poor? Are we just born to suffer? Are we just born to just worry about food and health? And it took me a really long time to come down to digital tools, to come down to digital economy, because I was like, oh, well, if I teach these kids how to code and they're hungry, what am I doing? Or if they're sick and all that. And what gave me comfort and what really kind of like made it okay for me to just focus on this part is that just the power of it, just how technology is such a magnifier. We are seeing even how M-Pesa transformed everything. Before M-Pesa, we used to put money on an envelope and send it. So if I'm in school, my mom needs to send me money, puts money on an envelope, put it on a matatu, which is like a bus, and get it all the way to school. Now we just get a text message. And what was really particularly powerful is just how when you are able to earn money online, let's say you're working for Google you're working for WTO as a software engineer from Mogotio, and you're able to earn that money, you get to decide what to do with your money, and you're able to spend on food, education, and so on. And so it's very hard to worry about climate change when you're just trying to feed your kids that night, or you're just trying to survive, just trying to treat your kids. So I thought about it and I realized, like, hey, if I can get rid of poverty, if I can sustainably fix poverty, create jobs for these people at a very, very cheap infrastructure, because all you need to do is just educate these people, then we're bringing more people to the table. Right. Then we're going to have more people talking about climate change solutions. Then we're going to have more people actually be part of the solutions. And so for me, when I think about digital infrastructure, I think about it twofold. Just how big of a multiplier it is, just how we can quickly, we just need to get, for example, We take 30 computers, we put it in a school. We have our teacher who is there from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. and every single week we are teaching over 600 kids. 600 kids every single week are learning about digital tools. Very, very cheap infrastructure, costs us about $8,000 a year. And so we can easily grow that. On the other hand, if we don't do that, in a few years, we are having kids graduating not even knowing how to send an email, not even knowing anything about digital tools. So forget about AI, forget about if you can't even send an email, if you can't even create a LinkedIn account. So it's becoming really, really hard. So for me, when I think about digital tools, I think about how cheap of an investment it is, especially on the education part, and just how powerful it is.
I think what you said very powerful. Because when we are talking about gap, we see it as a problem. But when we are providing solutions, we really need to see what are these gaps and how can we provide individual solutions rather than only big structural platforms. But for Thomas, you really need to think about big structural platforms. That's your job, right? I hope you are doing very well, and I can tell from your early answer. Thank you for your constructive suggestion. But to you, Sally, you are here not only representing UNEP, I also want to tap your expertise into Africa because you worked earlier for decades in Africa and also even working on the structural rules designing right now on your academic work. So, for example, about AI. So how do you see, what the gap that we are talking about, especially the developing economies, where are they in terms of designing our solutions?
It's a very interesting question. Let me maybe take this to the somewhat local level and give you two examples of solutions, since we're talking about solutions. One is from Africa and one is from Asia, if that's okay.
Please do.
So I'll start with the Asian one. We started a project at UNEP that was funded by the government of Japan, actually, and it's to do with plastic pollution in rivers in Asia. And it turns out that most projects, when they talk about plastic pollution, they look at oceans and seas and things like that, but actually rivers are some of the biggest contributors, especially big rivers like the Yangtze and the Nile, even in Africa, are some of the biggest polluters. And so what we implemented together with a bunch of partners is a system that is AI-enabled that detects plastics in rivers and classifies the type of plastic. So what exactly is it? Where is it? Where are the hotspots? And not only that, but it connects with different local communities, like schools, for example, to organize campaigns to go and clean those hotspots. And at the same time, trace, based on the type of plastic and the type of material and so on and so forth, it traces it back across the supply chain to its origin, so that we know what the source of pollution is and can start fixing the problem at the source. So this is a project that's been implemented quite successfully for a few rivers in Asia. We're hoping to take it to Africa and other continents next. The other Africa-based project has to do with agriculture, actually. So one of the biggest problems in Egypt, where I'm originally from, is that in the Nile Delta, most farming plots are very small and owned by relatively poor farmers who don't have access to a lot of technology and a lot of resources. And this creates a problem for them because they can't market their crops. They don't often know what they need to know in terms of using pesticides and fertilizers and that kind of stuff. So what we implemented was a two-stage project. The first phase was a smart assistant for farmers, and everyone now has a mobile phone of some description, and if they don't know how to use it, their children know. So we implemented a chatbot, voice-enabled, so you don't have to know how to read and write, that gives them advice. And you can just snap a picture of a pest, for example, on a plant, have it diagnosed in seconds, and know how to treat it. You know what the market price is for your crop when to irrigate, when to plant what, and so on and so forth. So again, this is an example of how a government can make an impact on a very, very local and individual level.
Professor.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I look at the big picture, I think in many ways, again, from a science engineering point of view, we have the solutions to many of the problems. For example, I will again go back to, say, the IPCC second assessment, IPCC last assessment report, working group 2, that talks about adaptation. And so there is a very nice, figure, 2 pages of figures, and it has all the different adaptation, measures that you could take, and then there are rows of, what are the barriers? And science and technology is not a barrier. In other words, we do know how to do these things. For example, Robin earlier was talking about, carbon neutral farming. So, for example, if you look at managing using forests as a kind of adaptation or even mitigation solution, for example, biological carbon sequestration is going to be, or has the possibility of being used as a large carbon sink, and that you could trade, if and when we have carbon permits. But the problem is, we know how to measure. We have satellites, we have local sensors, we know how to measure carbon. We know how much carbon is going in, how much is being emitted, but there is we have not been able to come to a point where everybody agrees that, okay, this is what we are going to trade. So to me, it is not a science or technology problem, but rather people perhaps a regulatory or that kind of a framework. So in other words, we need to catch up to the science so that we can harness the tools of this data better. One other thing that I remembered, when Nelly said about digital currency. So in the last, in India, the currency landscape has changed. It's completely digital. If I want to buy a cup of tea, I actually have no cash in my wallet for years now. I just take out my phone. So when I came here to Switzerland, and then obviously it doesn't work. So I took out my card. I wanted to pay for a cup of coffee, and they said, no, you have to spend 10 francs. Only then, you can use your card. So I, spent money on something that I did not need. I think, if we had kind of a way to make this uniform across borders or across systems, it would be much easier for us.
By the way, we have seen digitalization, for example, in financial sector at different levels over the past few years, especially as a result of the pandemic challenge. But that really pushed us for real innovation because we need to. Who said that earlier? You said we need to make the change because we really need to. That, I think, is a great quote from this panel. And final words from you before we open up, Robin.
Yeah,
Very briefly, please. You raised your hand earlier.
Yeah, exactly. Listening to this panel, then we are doing very well with innovation. Now it's mainly about implementation.
Yes.
Nelly over here is working with computers that are 3 years old. So, and they are changing lives. So it's mainly about the implementation. We have so many conferences about AI, about innovation and so on. Now it's time about implementing the existing technology and getting to the same level on that side as well.
I'm so glad that through this public forum, we realize what is the biggest challenge. It's implementation, it's action. And meanwhile, everybody on the stage are trying to provide specific examples about how to provide solutions, how to give solutions. My questions are only preliminary. We have so many smarter minds sitting in the audience from the media, from the academic circle, from the private sector, from government. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have about 10 to 15 minutes to open up to the floor. Shall we collect the questions at the very, yes, I see you over there. So we collect the questions all together, and then we let our panelists answer just to provide more sufficient time for everybody. Do we have, yes. So when you ask a question, please make sure you tell your affiliation and also make sure you are speaking to the microphone on the table. Our technician specifically advised us before the session began. So thank you so much. The gentleman sitting over there, yes, you. And shall we not to do a speech, but rather a question? Thank you.
All right, thanks. My name is Emmanuel Wachendo. I'm from the Institute of Economic Affairs, Kenya, a think tank. So we're all about knowledge. Thank you so much to the fantastic panelists. My question is this. What do you see from your perspective as people acting in the private sector and also somewhere in between the private and public sector, your role in understanding your understanding of the relationship between the governance model wherever you're operating and the success of the specific operations you're engaged in, and what you would say about the relationship between digitization and digital goods and manufacturing, also building stuff. So are you talking about digitization outside of manufacturing, or how does manufacturing in the future of just, whether it's getting kids to learn to make their way into spaces where digital and manufacturing interact? What do you guys think about these two things?
If I could maybe very briefly summarize, you're talking about public-private partnership, is that what you're trying to say? And also about the transformation of industry.
Yes.
Especially for developing countries, we're seeing different layers from the first industrial revolution to the fourth, even beyond, right? All at the same time. That's your question, isn't it?
That is exactly my question.
Thank you
put
so
it
much,
perfectly.
Sir. All right, thank you so much. Let's go to the other, yes, the gentleman over there, and then I come back to this part of the, yes, the gentleman over there. Did you turn on the microphone?
Sorry.
Yes.
My name is Rodrigo Lima from Agroecon in Brazil. And there's, from the parties of the Paris Agreement, 100% of the parties said that they want to adopt actions on the energy sector. 141 parties wants to adopt climate actions on agriculture. What is your views on how trade can foster digitalization and innovation as a manner to achieve different needs from parties? Because otherwise we will continue to have good cases, but I think we need to be much more ambitious trying to deploy renewable energy. What is your views about this? Thank you.
Excellent. The role of trade today in facilitating some of the critical questions we're talking about. Thank you. We got already two over there. Yeah, there's one lady over there. I cannot let, so please, the last question from this side, and then we go to this side. Please, this lady.
Thank you. The fact that more and more people and companies make the choice of using green technologies boosts green innovation. But what kind of instrument would facilitate the green digitalization? Do you think that an international instrument would facilitate the digitalization in a sense that it would permit to solve problems? Thank you.
And your affiliation, please?
Sorry?
Your affiliation?
Oh, sorry. MO manager and lawyer. Thank you.
Well, we have a lawyer sitting over there. You were asking earlier. Thank you very much. We go to this side to collect more questions. Yes, this lady over there, and then the other lady next to you, and we have a gentleman maybe over there. Yes. Okay, let's go with this order, please.
Yes, hello, you can hear me now?
Sorry, I apologize to all the others. I know you have great questions. We have time limits, so please.
So thank you so much. My name is Joy Center, the founder of Africa Women in Trade, and we operate purely digital. And I live in Germany, so you can hear we have 4,000 women operating digital. This question directly is
okay. No more high advertisement, please. Questions.
It's going straight to Nelly, and congratulations for the CNN hero. So my question is, how do you see digitalization in the future in regards to trade and in relation to supporting SMEs in trade? So how do you see that in the future? Because we know Africa, digitalization, you were winning during COVID. You're much advanced than Europe, because I can attest that because I work with 4,000 women. So how are you seeing that in the future?
Digitalization for SMEs.
Advancing and getting as well. I know you're not in the policy area, but how can we have policies around this area as well?
Thank you. And congratulations for many of your achievements. Please, the lady over there in pink.
Thank you very much. Hi, Fabienne Salem from ITC, which is both UN and WTO. So our primary audience with whom we work are digital startups and tech SMEs, I would say, primarily from emerging economies, to whom we do capacity building. But what happens often is whenever we talk about anything related to sustainability or green, we shall not forget that these are very vulnerable SMEs, very small startups just starting. They tend to see this as rather a financial burden. For example, when we talk about more sustainable ways to manage data or store data or e-waste and creating a whole recycling paths. So from your experience, what is the most efficient way to also promote sustainability as something profitable to SMEs from a very business and profitability perspective? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last question from this side, that gentleman over there, please.
Okay, thank you. On m'entend?
Yes, you can be heard.
Désolé, je vais parler en français. Je me nomme Zengeze Erich, je suis coordonnateur d'une organisation de la société civile camerounaise. Et ma préoccupation sera complémentaire aux deux précédentes interventions. Quand on parle de numérique en Afrique, et le cas du Cameroun en particulier, on se rend compte que l'outil numérique est le mieux utilisé par des gens qui ne produisent pas. On les appelle aujourd'hui des influenceurs. Parce que ceux qui produisent dans les champs, ils n'ont peut-être pas ce temps, ou alors parce que le coût du numérique est extrêmement cher. Ça, c'est pour le cas du Cameroun. N'est-il pas possible de penser des alternatives réelles pour ceux qui produisent là, ceux qui ont déjà la responsabilité de nourrir, d'avoir accès non seulement à la technologie, mais à un coût très bas et surtout à la formation? Merci.
Okay, thank you. I think we got wonderful questions from our audience. If I could just categorize them a little bit so that you guys can handle easier. One is more about some of the common questions of PPP, public-private partnership, small, medium-sized enterprises all over the world, financial access, things like that. The other is more specifically to, I would say, developing countries, developing economies, about the industrialization, how manufacturing, and also about earlier that gentleman raised coming from Cameroon, the latest development in the area. So can you maybe handle them? Let's just talk about the common question first. Public-private partnership. Everybody answer in about 30 seconds. Yes. Quick solutions.
No, can I actually cover them all?
Oh, you could. Can you do it within the time limit?
Yeah, I'll try. So first of all, I think there's a few aspects here to unpack for me, and I think they are related. One is like about which areas of industry digitalization has effects, and I think that's what you just quoted in the very beginning, how digitalization, how digital trade is increasing. So I think it's not about digitizing existing industries, but also for the countries and people and companies finding its own new niches and new paths in the value chain that can earn money through digitalization. We see, for example, data labeling for AI models, happening in Kenya, actually, for example, with some challenges, but that's also kind of question is how to make sure that those value, the value part in the value chain is becoming more, better and upgraded, rather than taking the very low. And that's kind of where skills comes and awareness and all that. But I think it's not about digitizing manufacturing, digitizing something else, but it's also about creating those new opportunities, these new businesses. Now, digitalization by itself, green is profitable, at least from our industry we see. A lot of telecom operators don't use renewable energy because it's cheaper. They use it because, especially in remote areas, it's easier to have a solar panel than a diesel generator, And I think we see the same in so many other different areas. If you kind of propose and show the solutions, those solutions, the green solutions these days, are not only competing, but actually more profitable than factual one. Finally, on that question, on the how do you achieve that global movement? And I think, of course, we are here where a lot of treaties are made, but I think we're also here to see how difficult it is to get to the treaties. So, and I think here, what we play, at least as ITU, that role in the, we have our treaty piece, but also play a big role in the standardization piece, which is kind of the place which you bring the community together to agree on things, and you adopt because it's good, not only because someone tells you to adopt. And I think we've proven that that kind of works pretty well, and in terms of digitalization as well. And so both by having digital standards, but then by galvanizing community together through the, creating joint movement, through peer groups and all that, to really do that.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Once again, about PPP, public-private partnership, and also small and medium-sized enterprise. Anybody want to take? Okay, please.
Well, I can tell a quick summary from about the implementation from Estonia, from the country where I'm
Very
from.
briefly, please.
I'm coming from the farming family myself, and we didn't have a computer in home until I was, I don't know, 10-year-old or something like this. But then what government did with all of the farmers was that they gave computers to farmers. And farmers were not the ones who started using it, but it was children of the farmers. And I guess it's well, a good example of the public-private relationship and partnership. And in the end, in this room, we are not the guys who will solve everything. The guys on the field, they are going to be the ones who will actually, the next generation, they will be the ones who will solve things.
Believe in the creativity from the grassroots level. That's what we need to do also while we are doing the bigger structure policies. Want to say anything on this?
I think for us, the biggest challenge has actually been like redistributing the technology. So like, for example, when we want to import used computers into Kenya, we are looking at almost 50% in taxes. So I think there really are powerful technology out there, but it's really quite a challenge first to get them from companies because they would rather destroy them than donate them. And then once we want to get into the country, we are looking at really exorbitant taxes. So making that part easier. On the US side, because making it green, like let's make the machines last longer. And then also on the redistribution side. And that also answered the Cameroonian question about how do companies who have the technology and have the means to produce these things, how can they make it easier to distribute across the world instead of just focusing on markets that can afford it?
Great. Sally. And then Professor.
I'll just make one point that addresses several of the questions, which is we absolutely need to link the development agenda with the sustainability agenda. We can't keep them separate. And by linking, I mean having the right research, the right numbers, evidence-based use cases that show why it's at least neutral, or as Thomas said, in some cases, actually profitable to be more sustainable and use renewable resources. And then the second thing after that is really to enable trade in a very tangible way. Have the ability for some of these innovations, some of which happen in rural Africa, but some of which happen in Scandinavia, but that's not where the problem is. The problem is in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. So how do we enable the people who have developed some of the cost-effective solutions to get to the people who need them? Digital can help, but we also need kind of trade-like thinking, enabling easier people movement, enabling easier movement of ideas and technology transfer.
Right, please.
Just quick answer to the gentleman over there that yes, you can make production more efficient by using more data, more AI, optimize your production. But obviously in the short term, you have to think of other costs like, how that affects employment. And to the lady over there, the question, yes, there can be too much data. Actually, 100 years back, someone said that wealth of information is poverty of attention. So we need to be smart about how we collect data and what we do with it. Yeah.
We'll have another 1.5 hours to explain how we're going to do that, maybe in the next future panels later in the public forum and certainly for our discussions in the future. One of the things as a moderator I'm pleasantly surprised is the fact that all the panelists are trying to provide very well-founded solutions based on numbers, their own experiences, as well as the collective experiences they have sought from all the others they are working with. So I want to thank you for that. Meanwhile, as we are approaching MC13 coming next year, this is going to be a grand opportunity for all of us to implement what we said today with actions. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, on the panel, and great appreciation for all of you. With that, we're coming to the end of this high-level session on digital boost to green innovation. I'm Tian Wei. Thank you so much. Bye.